Hi, everybody. I'm here to read the next chapter of Harry Potter in the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling and illustrated by Jim Kay. We haven't really said, I don't think, illustrated by, but this is an illustrated copy, so. All right. We're on chapter 11, the Dueling Club. If we take it back a little, we remember that Harry was hit by a rogue bludger while he was playing Quidditch. That Dobby, believe it or not, Dobby's the one who sent that bludger to Harry. And it broke his arm, and then, of course, Professor Lockhart tried to fix his arm and made all the bones in his arm disappear. So you can decide if you think that Professor Lockhart, who has like 6 books that he's written on being really good at magic, is actually really good at magic. And if you think, well, he's not really good at magic, I want you to decide and make a prediction like, well, how did he write all those books about doing all these great magic deeds? Like, why isn't he as good as he is in his books? So we're going to start there. And at the very end of that chapter, most importantly, Harry heard that Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, that they found Colin Creevey, the kid chasing Harry and taking pictures, frozen, petrified. They found him petrified in the hallway, and his film melted. Now, you guys don't know what film is because you're young. But it used to be when you have a camera, you didn't use the camera on your phone. Instead, you used a camera that was by itself. And in that camera, you put something called film. Like, it was a special thing that you put in there that, like, the pictures went on. And then you would take it to a store to get the store to take the film and make pictures from. Some people still do that who take pictures, but not nearly as much as who used to. So that's the way when I was a kid, when Harry was a kid, that film was developed. So just so you know, but that film was melted, which is not usual. That's not something that normally would happen. And that's making everybody very suspicious. They think that the Chamber of Secrets is open again. And that proves to Harry that, in fact, there is a Chamber of Secrets. So let's get started, all right? All right, here you go. Chapter 11, The Dueling Club. Harry woke up on Sunday morning to find the dormitory blazing with winter sunlight and his arms rebound very stiff. He sat up quickly and looked over at Colin's bed, but it had been blocked from view by the high curtain Harry had changed behind yesterday. Seeing that he was awake, Madame Pomfrey came bustling over with a breakfast tray and then began bending and stretching his arms and fingers. "All in order," she said, as he clumsily fed himself porridge left-handed. "When you're finished eating, you may leave." Harry dressed up as quickly as he could and hurried off to Gryffindor Tower, desperate to tell Ron and Hermione about Colin and Dobby, but they weren't there. Harry left to look for them, wondering where they could have gotten to, and feeling slightly hurt that they weren't interested in whether he had Bones back or not. As Harry passed the library, Percy Weasley strolled out of it, looking in far better spirits than the last time they met. "Oh, hello, Harry," he said. "Excellent flying yesterday, really excellent. Gryffindor have just taken the lead for the House Cup. You earned 50 points. "You haven't seen Ron and Hermione, have you?" said Harry. "No, I haven't," said Percy, his smile fading. "I hope Ron's not in another girls' toilet." Harry forced a laugh. Percy watched out of sight and then headed straight for Moaning Myrtle's. Harry forced a laugh, watched Percy out of sight, and then headed straight for Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. He couldn't see why Ron and Hermione would be there again. But after making sure that neither Filch nor any prefects were around, he opened the door and heard their voices coming from a locked cubicle. "It's me," he said. "Oh, no, it's me," he said, closing the door behind him. There was a clunk and a splash and a gasp from within the cubicle, and he saw Hermione's eyes peering through the keyhole. "Harry," she said, "you gave us such a fright. Come in. How's your arm?" "Fine," said Harry, squeezing in the cubicle. An old cauldron was perched on the toilet, and the cracking from under the rim told Harry they had lit a fire beneath it. Conjuring up portable, waterproof fires was a specialty of Hermione's. We'd come to meet you, but we decided to get started on the polyjuice potion, Ron explained as Harry, with difficulty, locked the cubicle again. We've decided that this is the safest place to hide it. Harry started to tell them about Colin, but Hermione interrupted. We already know. We heard Professor McGonagall telling Professor Flitwick this morning. That's why we decided to go ahead and we better get going. The sooner we get a confession out of Malfoy, the better, snarled Ron. Do you know what I think? He think he was in such a fool temper after the Quidditch match. He took it out on Colin. There's something else, said Harry, watching Hermione um, tearing bundles of knot grass and throwing them in the potion. Dobby came to visit me in the middle of the night. Ron and Hermione looked up amazed. Harry had told them everything Dobby had told him, or hadn't told him. Ron and Hermione listened with their mouths open. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened before, said Hermione. That settles it, said Ron in a triumphant voice. Lucius Malfoy must have opened the chamber when he was at school here, and now he's told dear old Draco how to do it. It's obvious. Wish Dobby had told you what kind of monster's in there, though. I want to know how come nobody's noticed it sneaking around the whole school. Maybe it can make itself invisible, said Hermione, prodding leeches to the bottom of the cauldron. Or maybe it can disguise itself, pretend to be a suit of armor or something. I've read about the chameleon ghouls. You've read too much, said Ron, pouring dead lacewings on top of the leeches. He crumpled up the empty lacewing bag and looked round at Harry. So Dobby stopped us getting on the train and broke your arm. He shook his head. You know what, Harry? If he doesn't stop trying to save your life, he's going to kill you. The news that Colin Creevey had been attacked was now lying as though dead in the hospital wing, had spread through the entire school. By Monday morning, the air was suddenly thick with rumor and suspicion. The first years were now moving around the castle in tight-knit groups, as though they were scared they would be attacked if they ventured forth alone. Jenny Weasley, who sat next to Colin Creevey in Charms, was distraught, but Harry felt that Ron and George were going the wrong way about cheering her up. They were taking it in turns to cover themselves with fur or boils and jump out at her from behind statues. They only stopped when Percy, apoplectic with rage, told them that he was going to write to Mrs. Weasley and tell her Jenny was having nightmares. Meanwhile, hidden from the teachers, a roaring trade in talismans, amulets, and other protective devices were sweeping the school. Neville Longbottom bought a large, evil-smelling green onion and pointed purple crystal and a rotting newt tail before the other Gryffindor boys pointed out that he was in no danger, he was a pure blood, and therefore unlikely to be attacked. They went for Filch next. Neville said, his round face fearful. They went for Filch first, Neville said, his round face fearful. And everyone knows I'm almost a squib. So he's saying that the bad people went for Filch first, and Neville's not good. He said Neville's saying he's really not good at magic. He can do it, but he's like pretty much just like Filch, where he can't do any magic. In the second week of December, Professor McGonagall came around as usual, collecting names of those who'd been staying at school for Christmas. Harry, Ron, and Hermione signed her list. They had heard that Malfoy was staying, which struck them as very suspicious. The holidays would be a perfect time to try to use the Polyjuice potion and try to worm a confession out of him. Unfortunately, the potion was always only half finished. They still needed Bicornhorn and the Boomslang skin, and the only place they were going to get them was from Snape's private stores. Harry privately felt he'd rather face Slytherin's legendary monster than have Snape catch him robbing his office. What we need, said Hermione briskly as the Thursday afternoon double potions lesson loomed nearer, is a diversion. Then one of us can sneak into Snape's office and take what we need. Harry and Ron looked at her nervously. I think I'd better do the actual stealing, Hermione continued in a matter-of-fact tone. You two will be expelled if you get in any more trouble, and I've got a clean record. So all you need to do is cause enough mayhem to keep Snape busy for 5 minutes or so. Harry smiled feebly. Deliberately causing mayhem in Snape's potions class was about as safe as poking a sleeping dragon in the eye. Potions lessons took place in one of the large dungeons in the usual way. No, I'm sorry. Thursday's afternoon lessons proceeded in the usual way. 20 cauldrons stood steaming between the wooden desks, on which stood brass scales and jars of ingredients. Snape prowled through the fumes, making waspish remarks about the Gryffindor's work, while the Slytherins sniggered appreciatively. Remember, that means laughed. Draco, who was Snape's favorite student, kept flicking puffer eyes at Harry and Ron, who knew that if they retaliated, they would get detention faster than you can say unfair. Harry's swelling solution was far too runny, but he had his mind on more important things. He was waiting for Hermione's signal, and he hardly listened to Snape pass to sneer at his watery potion. When Snape turned and walked off to bully Neville, Hermione caught Harry's eye and nodded. Harry ducked swiftly down behind the cauldron, pulled one of Fred's filibuster fireworks out of his pocket, and gave it a quick prod with his wand. The firework began to buzz, fizz, and sputter. Knowing he only had seconds, Harry straightened up, took aim, and lobbed it into the air. It landed right on target in Goyle's cauldron. Goyle's potion exploded, showering the whole class. People shrieked as splashes of swelling potion hit them. Malfoy got fearful, and his nose began to swell like a balloon. Goyle blundered around, his hands over his eyes, which had expanded to the size of dinner plates, while Snape was trying to restore calm and find out what had happened. Through the confusion, Harry saw Hermione slip quickly out of the door. "Silence! Silence!" Snape roared. "Anyone who has been splashed, come here for the deflating draught when I find out who did this." Harry tried not to laugh as he watched Malfoy hurry forward, his head drooping with the weight of a nose like a small melon. As half the class lumbered up to Snape's desk, some weighed down with arms like clubs, others were unable to talk through gigantic puffed-up lips. Harry saw Hermione slide back into the dungeon, the front of her robes bulging. When everyone had taken a swig of antidote and the various swellings had been subsided, Snape swept over to Goyle's cauldron and scooped out the twisted black remains of the firework. There was a sudden hush. "If I ever find out who threw this," Snape whispered, "I shall make sure that person is expelled." Harry ranged his face into what he hoped was a most puzzled expression. Snape was looking right at him. When the bell rang 10 minutes later, Snape was looking right at him. And when the bell rang 10 minutes later, could not have been more welcome. And the bell rang 10 minutes later, which could not have been more welcome. "He knew it was me," Harry told Ron and Hermione as they hurried back to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. "I could tell." Hermione threw the new ingredients into the cauldron and began to stir feverishly. It'll be ready in a fortnight," she said happily. So let's pause to talk about what a fortnight, spelled this way, Fortnight, is. A fortnight is not a video game. I mean, it is a video game, but in this case, it is not a video game. Fortnight actually means 2 weeks or 14 days. So when you hear people say a fortnight, that's just a way of saying it's going to be ready in 2 weeks without just saying 2 weeks. So that's a fortnight. Snape can't prove it was you," said Ron reassuringly to Harry. "What can he do?" "Knowing Snape, something foul," said Harry as the potion frothed and bubbled. And look, we got some little stars up here, which means there's time that has passed, right? A week later, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were walking across the entrance hall when they saw a small knot of people gathered around the notice board, reading a piece of parchment that had been pinned up. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas beckoned them over, looking exciting. "They're starting a dueling club," said Seamus. "First meeting tonight. I wouldn't mind dueling lessons. They might come in handy one of these days." "What do you reckon Slytherin's monster can do?" said Ron, But he too read the sign with interest. Could be useful, he said to Harry and Hermione as they went into dinner. Shall we go? Harry and Hermione were all for it, so at 8 o'clock that evening they hurried back to the great hall. The long dining tables had vanished, and a golden stage had appeared along one wall, lit by thousands of candles floating overhead. The ceiling was velvety black once more, and most of the school seemed to be packed beneath it. All carrying wands and looking excited. I wonder who will be teaching us, said Hermione as they edged into the chattering crowd. Someone told me Flitwick was a dueling champion when he was young. Maybe it'll be him. As long as it's not, Harry began, but he ended on a groan. Gilderoy Lockhart was walking to the stage, resplendent in robes of deep plum, and accompanied by none other than Snape, wearing usual black. Lockhart waved an arm for silence and called, Gather round! Gather round! Can everyone see? Can you all hear me? Excellent. Now, Professor Dumbledore has granted me permission to start this little dueling club, to train you all up in case you ever need to defend yourselves, as I myself have done on countless occasions. For full details, see my published works. Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape, said Lockhart, flashing a wide smile. He tells me he knows a tiny bit about dueling himself, and has sportingly agreed to help me with this short demonstration before we begin. Now, I don't want any of you youngsters to worry. You'll still have your potions, Master, when I'm through with him. Never fear. Wouldn't it be good if they finished each other off? Ron muttered in Harry's ear. Snape's upper lip was curling. Harry wondered why Lockhart was still smiling. If Snape had been looking at him like that, he'd be running as fast as he could in the opposite direction. Lockhart and Snape turned to face each other and bowed, Lockhart did, with much twirling of his hands, whereas Snape jerked his head irritably. They had raised their wands like swords in front of them. As you see, we are holding our wands in the accepted combatant positions, Lockhart told the silent crowd. On the count of 3, we will cast our first spells. Neither of us will be aiming to kill, of course. I wouldn't bet on that, Harry murmured, watching Snape baring his teeth. 1, 2, 3. Both of them swung their wands up over their shoulders. Snape cried, Expelliarmus! There was a dazzling flash of scarlet light, and Lockhart was blasted off his feet, flew backwards off the stage, and smashed into the wall and slid down in a sprawl on the floor. Malfoy and some of the other Slytherins cheered. Hermione was dancing on tiptoes. Do you think he's all right? She squealed through her fingers. Who cares? Said Ron and Hermione and Harry together. Ron and Harry aren't the biggest Lockhart fans, are they? Lockhart was getting unsteadily to his feet. His hat had fallen off and his wavy hair was standing on end. Well, there you have it, he said, tottering onto the platform. That was a disarming charm, as you are. I've lost my wand. Ah, yes, thank you, Miss Brown. Yes, an excellent idea to show them that, Professor Snape. But if you don't mind my saying so, a bit obvious what you're about to do. If I'd wanted to stop you, it would have been only too easy. However, I felt it would be instructive to let them see. Snape was looking murderous. Probably Lockhart had noticed because he said, Enough demonstrating. I'm going to come amongst you now and put you all into pairs. Professor Snape, if you'd help me. They moved through the crowd, matching up partners. Lockhart teamed Neville with Justin Finch-Fletchley, but Snape reached Harry and Ron first. Time to split up the dream team, I think. He sneers. Weasley, you can partner with Finnegan. Potter. He moved automatically towards Hermione. I don't think so, said Snape, smiling coldly. Mr. Malfoy, come over here. Let's see what you make of the famous Potter. And you, Miss Granger, you can partner with Miss Bulstrode. Malfoy strutted over, smirking. Behind him, walked a Slytherin girl who reminded Harry of a picture he'd seen in Holidays with Hags. She was large and square, and her heavy jaw jutted aggressively. Hermione gave her a weak smile, which she did not return. "Face your partners," called Lockhart, back on the platform, "and bow." Harry and Malfoy barely inclined their heads. So let's do it not taking their eyes off each other. So let's barely do it to each other. Let's barely nod. Because, with somebody you really like, you might go. But if you don't really like somebody, you don't really want to show them that respect, right? Let's keep going. "Wands at the ready," shouted Lockhart. "When I count to 3, cast your charms to disarm your opponent. Only to disarm them. We don't want any accidents. 1, 2, 3. Harry swung his wand over his shoulder. But Malfoy had started on 2. Of course he had. His spell hit Harry so hard he felt as though he'd been hit over the head with a saucepan. He stumbled, but everything seemed to be working. And wanting no more time, Harry pointed his wand straight at Malfoy and shouted, "Rictum Sempra!" A jet of silver light hit Malfoy in the stomach, and he doubled, wheezing. "I said disarm only!" Lockhart shouted in alarm over the heads of the battling crowd as Malfoy sank to his knees. Harry had hit him with the tickling charm, and he could barely move for laughing. Harry hung back with a vague feeling it would be unsporting to bewitch Malfoy while he was on the floor. But this was a mistake. Gasping for breath, Malfoy pointed to his own wand at Harry's knees, choked, "Tarantallegra!" And the next second, Harry's legs had begun to jerk around out of control in a kind of quick step. "Stop! Stop! Stop! Stop!" screamed Lockhart, but Snape took charge. "Finante incantatem," he shouted. Harry's feet stopped dancing. Malfoy stopped laughing, and they were able to look up. A haze of greenish smoke was hovering over the scene. Both Neville and Justin were lying on the floor, panting. Ron was holding up an ashen-faced Seamus, apologizing for whatever his broken wand had done. But Hermione and Mildred Bulstrode were still moving. Millicent had Hermione in a headlock, and Hermione was whimpering in pain. Both their wands lay forgotten on the floor. Harry leapt forward and pulled Millicent off. It was difficult. She was a lot bigger than he was. "Dear, dear, dear," said Lockhart, skittering through the crowd, looking at the aftermath of the duels. "Up you get, Macmillan. Careful there, Miss Fawcett. Pinch her hand. Pinch it hard. It'll stop the bleeding, Boot." "I think I'd better show you how to block unfriendly spells," said Lockhart, standing flustered in the middle of the great hall. He glanced at Snape, whose black eyes glinted, and looking quickly away, "Let's have a volunteer pair. Longbottom and Flinch Fletchley. How about you?" "That is a bad idea, Professor Lockhart," said Snape, gliding over a large, malevolent bat. "Longbottom causes devastation with the simplest of spells. We'll be sending what's left of Finch Fletchley up to the hospital wing in a matchbox." Neville's round, pink face was one pinker. "How about Malfoy and Potter?" Snape with a twisted smile. "Excellent idea," said Lockhart, gesturing at Harry and Malfoy in the middle of the hall as the crowd backed away to give them room. "Now, Harry," said Lockhart, "when Draco points his wand at you, you do this." He raised his own wand, attempted a complicated sort of wiggling action, and dropped it. Snape smirked as Lockhart quickly picked up, saying, "Whoops, my wand was a little overexcited." Snape moved closer to Malfoy, bent down and whispered something in his ears. Malfoy smirked too. Harry looked nervously up at Lockhart and said, "Professor, could you show me that blocking thing again?" "Scared," muttered Malfoy. Muttered Malfoy. "Scared, muttered Malfoy so that Lockhart couldn't hear him. "You wish," Harry said out of the corner of his mouth. Lockhart cuffed Harry merrily on the shoulder. "Just do what I did, Harry." "What, drop my wand?" But Lockhart wasn't listening. 3, 2, 1, go, he shouted. Malfoy raised his arm quickly and bellowed, Serpensortia! The end of his wand exploded. Harry watched, aghast, as a long black snake shot out of it, fell heavily onto the floor between them, and raised itself, ready to strike. There were screams as the crowd blacked swiftly away, clearing the floor. Don't move, Potter, said Snape, lazily, clearly enjoying the sight of Harry standing motionless, eye to eye with the angry snake. I'll get rid of it. Allow me, shouted Lockhart as he brandished his wand at the snake, and there was a loud bang, and then the snake, instead of vanishing, flew 10 feet into the air and fell back on the floor with a loud smack. Enraged, hissing furiously, it slithered straight towards Justin Finch-Fletchley and raised itself again, fangs exposed, poised to strike. Harry wasn't sure what made him do it. He wasn't even aware of deciding to do it. All he knew was that his legs were carrying him forward as though he was on casters, and that he had shouted stupidly at the snake, Leave him! And miraculously, inexplicably, the snake slumped to the floor and, docile as a thick black garden hose, its eyes now on Harry. Harry felt the fear drain out of him. He knew the snake wouldn't attack anyone now, though how he knew he couldn't have explained. He looked up at Justin, grinning, expecting to see Justin looking relieved or puzzled or even grateful, but certainly not angry and scared. What do you think you're playing at? He shouted, and before Harry could say anything, Justin had turned and stormed out of the hall. Snape stepped forward, waved his wand, and the snake vanished into a small puff of black smoke. Snape, too, was looking at Harry in an unexpected way. It was a shrewd and calculating look, and Harry didn't like it. He was also dimly aware of the ominous muttering all around the walls. He felt a tugging on the back of his robes. Come on, said Ron's voice in his ear. Move, come on. Ron steered him out of the hall, Hermione hurrying alongside them. As they went through the doors, the people on either side drew away as though they were frightened of catching something. Harry didn't have a clue what was going on, and neither Ron nor Hermione explained anything until they had dragged him all the way up to the empty Gryffindor common room. Then Ron pushed Harry into an armchair and said, You're a Parselmouth. Why didn't you tell us? I'm a what? Said Harry. A Parselmouth, said Ron. You could talk to snakes. I know, said Harry. I mean, it's only the second time I've ever done it. I accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin Dudley at the zoo once. Long story. But it was telling me that it had never been to Brazil, and I sort of set it free without meaning to. That was before I knew I was a wizard. A boa constrictor told you it had never seen Brazil. Oh, repeated Ron faintly, so I had to say that faintly. A boa constrictor told you you'd never been to Brazil. Ron repeated faintly. So, said Harry, I bet loads of people can do it. Oh, no, they can't, said Ron. It's not a very common gift, Harry. This is bad. What's bad? Said Harry, starting to feel quite angry. What's wrong with everyone? Listen, if I hadn't told the snake not to attack Justin. Oh, that's what you said to it. What do you mean? You were there. You heard me. I heard you speaking parcel tongue, said Ron. Snake language. You could have said anything. No wonder Justin panicked. You sounded like you were egging the snake on or something. It was creepy, you know. Harry gasped at him. I spoke a different language, but I didn't realize. How can I speak a language without knowing I speak it? Ron shook his head. Both he and Hermione were looking as though someone had died. Harry couldn't see what was so terrible. Do you want to tell me what's wrong with stopping a great dirty snake from biting Justin's head off? He said. What does it matter how I did it as long as Justin doesn't have to join the headless hunt? It matters, said Hermione, speaking at last in a hushed voice, because being able to talk to snakes was what Salazar Slytherin was famous for. And that's why the symbol of the Slytherin house is a serpent. Harry's mouth fell open. Exactly, said Ron. And now the whole school's going to think you're his great-great-grandson or something. But I'm not, said Harry with a panic he couldn't quite explain. You'll find it hard to prove, said Hermione. He lived about 1,000 years ago. For all we know, you could be. Harry lay awake for hours that night. Through a gap in the hangings around his four-poster, he watched snow starting to drift past the tower window. He wondered, could he be a descendant of Salazar Slytherin? He didn't know anything about his father's family, after all. The Dursleys had always forbidden questions about his wizarding relatives. Quietly, Harry tried to say something in Parseltongue, but the words wouldn't come. It seemed he had to be face to face with the snake to do it. But I'm in Gryffindor, Harry thought. The Sorting Hat wouldn't have put me here if I had been Slytherin's blood. Ah, said a little voice in his nasty little voice in his brain. But the Sorting Hat wanted to put you in Slytherin, don't you remember? Harry turned over. He'd seen Justin the next day in herbology, and he'd explained that he'd been calling the snake off, not egging it on, which, he thought angrily, pummeling his pillow, any fool should have realized. By the next morning, however, the snow had begun to fall in the night, and had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lesson of the term was canceled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation which she would entrust to no one else, now that it was too important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and revive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevy. Harry fretted about this for the next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione used their lesson off to play a game of wizard's chess. For heaven's sake, Harry, said Hermione, exasperated as one of Ron's bishops wrestled her knight off his horse and dragged him off of the cupboard. Go find Justin, and if it's so important to you. So Harry got up and left through the portrait hole, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it usually was in the daytime because of the thick, swirling gray snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what was happening within. Professor McGonagall was shouting at someone who, by the sound of it, had turned his friend into a badger. Resisting the urge to take a look, Harry walked on by, thinking that Justin might be using his free lesson to catch up on some work. He decided to check the library first. A group of Hufflepuff, who should have been in herbology, were indeed sitting at the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between long lines of the high bookshelves, Harry could see that their heads were close together, and they were having what looked like absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. He was walking towards them when something of what they're saying met his ears, and he paused to listen in the invisibility section. So anyway, a stout boy was saying, I told Justin to hide up in our dormitory. I mean, to say, if Potter's marked him down for his next victim. Oh. So here's a picture of Hogwarts. Look at this. Look at this little snowman. Here's a picture of Hogwarts and how thick the snow is. And here's a tree, the Whomping Willow, and you can kind of see in the background another tower of Hogwarts. I guess I could pause it so you guys can look at this. Hold on. I'm going to freeze it so you can look at it while I keep reading. Because if Potter's marked him as his next victim, it's best if he keeps a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let it slip to Potter he was Muggle-born. Justin actually told him he'd be down for eating. It's not the kind of thing you bandy about with Slytherins there on the loose, is it? You definitely think it's Potter, then, Ernie, said a girl with blonde pigtails anxiously. Hannah, said the stout boy solemnly, he's a Parselmouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you ever heard of a decent one who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpentine. There was some heavy murmuring at this, and Ernie went on. Remember what was written on the wall? Enemies of the air, beware. Potter had some sort of run-in with Filch. Next thing we know, Filch's cat is attacked. That first year, Creevy was annoying Potter at the Quidditch match, taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Next thing you know, Creevy's been attacked. He always seems so nice, though, said Hannah uncertainly. And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. Can't be all bad, can he? Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously, and the Hufflepuffs bent closer. Harry edged nearer so that he could catch Ernie's words. No one knows how he survived that attack by you-know-who. I mean, to say he was only a baby when it happened, and he should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that. He dropped his voice until it was barely more than a whisper and said, That's probably why you-know-who wanted to kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding. Harry couldn't take any more. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out from behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found the sight that greeted him funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they had been petrified by the sight of him, and the color was draining out of Ernie's face. "Hello," said Harry. "I'm looking for Justin Fletchley." The Hufflepuff's worst fears had clearly been confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. "What do you want with him?" said Ernie in a quivering voice. "To tell him what really happened with the snake at Dueling Club," said Harry. Ernie bit his white lips, taking a deep breath, and said, "We were all there. We saw what happened." "Then you noticed that after I spoke to it, the snake backed off," Harry said. "All I saw," said Ernie stubbornly, though he was trembling as he spoke, "was you, speaking parcel tongue, and chasing the snake toward Justin. I didn't chase it at him," said Harry, his voice shaking with anger. "I didn't even touch him." "It was a very near miss," said Ernie. "And in any case you're getting ideas," he added hastily. "I might tell you could trace my family back through 9 generations of witches and warlocks, and my blood is as pure as anyone, so—" "I don't care what sort of blood you've got," said Harry fiercely. "Why would I attack Muggle-borns?" "I heard you hate those Muggles you live with." "It's not possible to live with the Dursleys and not hate them," said Harry. "I'd like to see you try it." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing the gilded cover of a large spellbook. Harry blundered up the corridor, barely noticing where he was going. He was in such a fury. The result was that he walked into something very large and solid, which knocked him backwards onto the floor. "Oh, hello, Hagrid," Harry said, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava, but he couldn't possibly be anyone else. As he filled most of the corridor in his moleskin overcoat, a dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive gloved hands. "All right, Harry," he said, pulling up the balaclava so he could speak. "Why aren't you in class?" "Cancelled," said Harry, getting up. "What are you doing in here?" Hagrid held up the limp rooster. "Second one killed this term," he explained. "It's either foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm around the hen coop." He peered more closely at Harry from under his thick snow-flecked eyebrows. "You sure you're all right? You look hot and bothered." Harry couldn't bring himself to repeat what Ernie and the rest of the Hufflepuffs had been saying about him. "It's nothing. I better get going, Hagrid. It's Transfiguration next, and I've got to pick up all my books." He walked off, his mind still full of Ernie had said about him. Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let it slip to Potter he was Muggle-born. Harry stamped up the stairs and turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. The torches had been extinguished by a strong, icy draught, which was blowing through the loose pane. He was halfway down the passage when and I'm going to pause so we can, so here we go. When he tripped headlong over something lying on the floor. He turned to squint at what he had fallen over, and felt as though his stomach had dissolved. Justin Finch Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. But that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobile and horizontal 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off, and his face wore an expression of shock identical to Justin's. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing kind of a drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. Here's the spiders, right? The only sounds were the muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. He could run, and no one would ever know he had been there. But he couldn't just leave them lying there. He had to get help. Would anyone believe he had nothing to do with this? As he stood there panicking, a door next to him opened with a bang. Peeves the poltergeist came shooting out. Pause and make yourself a prediction. Peeves is never helpful. What do you think that Peeves is going to do when he sees Nearly Headless Nick and Harry, and he sees Ernie petrified? Let's see. Why, it's we, Potter, cackled Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced him. What's Potter up to? What's Potter lurking? Why's Potter lurking? Peeves stopped, halfway through midair somersault. Upside down, he spotted Justin and Nearly Headless Nick. He flipped right up, filled his lungs, and before Harry could stop him, screamed, Attack! Attack! Another attack! No mortal or ghost is safe! Run for your lives! Attack! Crash, crash, crash. Door after door flew open in the corridor, and people flooded out. For several long minutes there was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people standing around him. People kept standing in Nearly Headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as all the teachers shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored silence. She ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat than Ernie from the Hufflepuff arrived, panting on the scene. Caught in the act! Caught in the act! Ernie yelled, his face stark white, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry. That will do, Macmillan, said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves was bobbing overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and Nearly Headless Nick, examining them, Peeves broke into song. Oh, Potter, you little rotter, what have you done? You're killing off the students and think it's good fun. That's enough, Peeves, barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed away backwards, his tongue out at Harry. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinostra of the astronomy department, but no one seemed what to do for Nearly Headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured out a large fan out of thin air, which she gave to Ernie with instructions to waft Nearly Headless Nick up the stairs. Ernie did this, fanning Nick along like a silent black hovercraft. This left Harry and Professor McGonagall alone together. This way, Potter, she said. This way, Potter, she said. Professor, said Harry at once, I swear I didn't. This is out of my hands, Potter, Professor McGonagall said curtly. They all marched along in silence around the corner, and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly-looking gargoyle. Sherbet lemon, she said. This was evidently a password because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside, as the wall behind him split into two, even full of dread for what was coming. Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase which was moving smoothly upwards like an escalator. He and Professor McGonagall stepped into it, and Harry heard the wall close behind them. They rose upwards in circles, higher and higher, until at last, slightly dizzy, Harry could see the gleaming oak door ahead, with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. He knew where he was being taken. This must be where Dumbledore lived. So now Harry's going to go talk to Dumbledore. Do you think that Dumbledore is going to think Harry has done it? Or do you think that Dumbledore knows somehow that it's not Harry and it's something else? Think about that, and we'll read the next chapter tomorrow.